Hello, everyone. After the short break, I would like to introduce a workshop, Guidance and Training on Prison Management and Human Rights, Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, and the presenter will be Laura Jaffrey, Andrea Uber, and Martin Gilla. Andrea, could you please start the presentation? Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, and a very warm welcome to you all. I'm joining you from Odier's office. I'm sorry I could not be with you today, but I have another meeting also to attend. But I'm very grateful that Odier is able to present this session. We want to talk to you about the revised standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners, aka the Nelson Mandela Rules. But before my colleagues do so, I just thought I would like to spend a few minutes to explain where this text is even coming from and why it is so significant. The origin of it all were what we usually refer to as the SMR, the Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners. But what not everybody knows is that these were adopted in 1955, and they were used by prison management and policymakers as the go-to guidance text for decades. In fact, having worked on prison reform internationally, I know that many states based their national prison rules on this text, and some states literally endorsed them, copy-pasting sort of the SMR into their national framework. So they're really, really significant. The rules were adopted merely from the point of view of the penitentiary. There were no human rights considerations involved. There was no human rights text in there. But at the date of adoption, 1955, of course, there was no human rights framework yet. The first major human rights treaty was the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, and that was adopted only in 1966, so 11 years later. And so it's not surprising maybe that the SMR did not have any human rights language. And then it took 5 more decades. In 2011 only, a process of reflection began on whether and how to review the SMRs. There were a number of options that were discussed at the time, which I will not bore you with, but the option that was eventually chosen was a very novel one. It was the one that was first applied in this case, and it was referred to as the targeted revision. The reason it's referred to this is because the idea was not to start redrafting the entire text from scratch, but to look at the SMR as they existed and to identify which are the areas that are the most outdated, and then to revise only this text, but leave the rest as it was. And still, it took 4 years of negotiations with involvement of states, NGOs, academics, and representatives of intergovernmental organizations, including Odier. And to name drop some of the important actors involved, Special Rapporteur on Torture, but also the World Health Organization. And this is, of course, significant because there is a quite significant chapter on the provision of healthcare in prisons. The negotiations, which I had the honor to participate in, were really exciting because this was a reflection of the challenges in prison management and also of the standards and good practices that have been developed around the world in a whole range of different documents. And a great number of prison staff from across the globe were involved in this process too. And it ended up in the adoption of the revised standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners, aka the Nelson Mandela Rules. The rules were adopted, that's also important, I think, unanimously. There was no UN member state who objected. And I fondly really recall this moment of adoption after all these negotiations, which very often took us very late at night. And there was applause erupting in the plenary room of the United Nations in Vienna that day on 26 May 2015 at the 24th session of the Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. And in December then, the text was endorsed by the UN General Assembly. So it was really an amazing moment. Why was it so amazing? Because this was the first time in history, really, of the UN that the set of existing standards had been revised in this way. I mentioned this targeted revision method. It had worked. But even more amazing because there was such a sense of achievement, no? That 4 years of negotiations, but a really good text had been reached, we all felt. One that brings the SMR up to date with contemporary human rights standards, but still managed to be what they used to be, namely a very practical guidance for prison staff, written also from the point of view of the penitentiary and prison management. So it was possible to have rules that reconcile human rights standards and the interests of prison management. The consensus that was reached proves that there is no contradiction between these two. In fact, prison staff very often supported the very same texts as human rights NGOs, because in their experience, prisons are safer and easier to run if prisons are treated with fairness and dignity. Penitentiary staff gets what it takes. You don't want prisons to be a revolving door. If you want people to be rehabilitated and not reoffend and come back. And for this to happen, you need to treat them with fairness, with dignity, and to start with rehabilitation really as early as possible. Why is it called the Nelson Mandela Rules? That's because the last stage of the negotiations took place in Cape Town in South Africa, with a view to Robben Island, literally, where Nelson Mandela had been at prison, and South Africa was also very strong support in the whole process of adoption. So I hope that you will find interesting the offer that ODIHR has to present today, together with our colleagues and friends from the Swedish Prison and Probation Service, who were also very active supporter of the revision process, and that this will be something that you can endorse and take on in the prison academies. I wish you a very good session today, and I'm handing over to Laura and Martin.
Okay, thank you, Andrea, for this introduction. Can you hear? Yeah, you can hear me, right? So I have actually a presentation. I don't know if it's, I think it's going to be displayed, but anyway, dear participants, so I'm Laura. I am the advisor on torture prevention for ODIHR, and I'm very happy to be here today. You must know that it's the first time since the beginning of the pandemic that I speak in an event in person. So it's a very special day for me. And yeah, I don't have a lot of time, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but very briefly, maybe I want to present our main strategic priorities in the torture prevention portfolio. So the first one is related to the treatment of prisoners, mainly the implementation of the Mandela Rules, and it's what we're going to discuss today. A second strategic priority is related to strengthening the independent monitoring of all places of deprivation of liberty, and we work a lot with a national preventive mechanism on this. And the third priority will be to address incentives for torture in criminal justice systems. For example, think of over-reliance on confession, or failure to exclude torture-tainted evidence, or performance quotas for police or prosecutors, for example. So I'm not going to spend time presenting the Mandela Rules, because I think you're all familiar with it, and we also had an excellent presentation by Andrea. But yeah, I think they're viewed as a primary source of standards in relation to prison management and human rights. And like Andrea said, the rules reconcile human rights standards and the interest of prison management. So yes, it's about protecting the human rights of persons deprived of liberty, but also it creates a safer environment for prison staff, and it's also important, I think, to emphasize. And it helps prison authorities achieving what is the primary purpose of criminal justice systems, which is achieving rehabilitation and reintegration of prisoners for the benefit of society as a whole. So now a few words about our work. So in 2018, we released this guidance. I brought, unfortunately, I didn't have enough copies for everybody, but I brought 2 copies there on the table. If you want to, maybe you can pass it around and have a look to see how it's structured. Also, it was featured in the latest EPTA newsflash. But basically, so we worked on this with Penal Reform International, PRI, and it's a comprehensive document outlining existing standards and good practices and providing guidance for the implementation of the Mandela Rules. And it was developed based on research, on regional consultations, with prison administration and staff, NGOs, peer review meeting with international experts and institutions. So it was quite a comprehensive process to get to this, to the release of this publication. And yeah, also promising practices from all around the OSCE region were collected to illustrate possible approaches to implementing these rules. So it's primarily designed to assist prison administration to help understand and implement the Mandela Rules in practice and to improve conditions of detention and the treatment of prisoners, and with a focus on preventing torture and other ill treatment. It focuses on the revised rules, and it covers 7 main thematic areas. Here it's maybe difficult to read, but you can see like in the paper publication, but we have prison management, safety and security, incident prevention and response, restrictions, discipline and sanctions, contact with outside world, healthcare, and finally a short section on external monitoring. And this guidance also integrates a gender perspective in all aspects of prison management. It pays attention to special risks and needs faced by women prisoners, as well as risks for LGBTI prisoners. And it refers to the UN rule for the treatment of women prisoners and on custodial measures for women offenders, what we call the Bangkok rule, also whenever it's relevant throughout the document. So a few words about the structure. So for each section you have, so this example is related to access to information. So you have references to the relevant rules. Here it's rules 54 and 55, why it is important, and putting it into practice. For example, in this case, how the information can be communicated. For example, that prisoners could be provided with a copy of the rules and regulations, also ensure that illiterate prisoners have the information explained to them, etc. Sometimes also we have some graphs of figures to help clarifying the concept, for example, here on how to process different kinds of requests and complaints. And also, there are also good practices highlighted in some cases from some specific OSCE countries or from civil society organizations. I will also after show you the link. I mean, and I encourage you, if you're not familiar with it, you can have a look. It's mainly for prison administration. It can be useful also for trainers, for monitors, etc. And so the next steps now for us, we are working on a training curriculum for prison staff, still with PRI and in cooperation with the Swedish Prison and Probation Service, also in consultation with the UNODC. So it will be a 4-day training. We now have a comprehensive draft. There's also a trainer's guide and a training methodology included. There's suggestion of group works and exercise in each module. And the next step for us is to pilot it. So we're going to pilot it in one OSCE country, most likely early next year, and it will be followed by the training of trainer. And Martin after will probably tell you a bit more also about this work, but just to present the content, of course, keep in mind it's a draft. So this is a draft we have that we plan to pilot. It might change a little bit, but you can see the section does not strictly correspond to the guidance, but more or less the themes are similar. We now have 8 modules going from the admission of prisoner till release. So the first one is a presentation of the Mandela Rules. It also briefly presents all the relevant standards, for example, related to women or children, and also a short overview of the vulnerable categories in prison. The second module presents the different categories of prisoners and covers the minimum physical conditions and basic services that must be provided to all people in prison, for example, related to light, to heating, ventilation, hygiene, food, drinks, etc., with an emphasis on individual needs and reasonable adjustments when needed. Then we have a third module that details the importance of prisoner classification and individuals' risks and needs assessments, reiterating that sentence plans should be based on individual needs, capabilities, and dispositions. And the fourth module covers specific rights laid out in the Mandela Rules, which provide specific safeguards for people in prison against torture and ill treatment, as well as other human rights violations, such as access to information, how to submit requests and complaints, contact with the outside world, and also inspections and monitoring. The fifth module on incident prevention and response, discussing methods to maintain safety and security in prisons. We deal also with disciplinary offenses and how to manage unrest in a fair and human way. This includes also dynamic security approaches in order to prevent conflict and resolve problems before they escalate, including de-escalating techniques, mediation and conflict prevention techniques. The sixth module covers the use of restrictions, disciplinary sanctions, and sanctions in prison, with a focus on how they can be applied in a fair, consistent, and transparent manner in accordance with human rights standards. The module explored how overly punitive measures can be detrimental to the overall safety of a facility. And it also looks into detail at the provisions in the Nelson Mandela Rules related to solitary confinement. We have a seventh module that covers healthcare in prison and how it should be organized. So it briefly summarizes the specific duties of healthcare staff, but the main focus is actually on non-medical staff in the provision of healthcare, and how prison staff can also pay attention to the specific needs of people in prison, and also how they can protect their mental well-being, and their role also in documenting and reporting signs of torture in accordance with the Istanbul Protocol. And finally, the eighth module reviews the way in which prison staff can support the rehabilitation and reintegration of people in prison, and how they can protect society against crime and reduce recidivism. So, of course, this is something like all aspects of prison life contribute to successful rehabilitation, right? But this module focuses specifically on education, on vocational training, work programs, and other forms of practical assistance that authorities can deliver in order to support rehabilitation and reintegration. So basically, this is now the content of our training curriculum. It's quite comprehensive. And yeah, the next step is really to pilot it and see, and probably make some adjustments. I have the feeling it's a very like, there's a lot. So we'll see also then what is realistic for 4 days training. And I wanted to finish very briefly. Okay, so this is the link, but I think you will also really, the organizer will share all the relevant links and information and contact details with you. And I wanted just to finish by saying a few words about COVID-19. Oops, no, I did a mistake, sorry. COVID-19 in prisons, I know it's something you've been discussing a lot during these few days with a focus on training, but yeah, as you know, I mean, the pandemic has been affecting life in prison a lot, not only inmates, but also staff. And yeah, of course, the fact that many people are confined in the same place exacerbates the risk of being contaminated. But COVID also affected prisoners in other ways. For example, very often new arrivals or people who have been infected or suspected of being infected are isolated from others, which actually, it of course makes sense to ensure that they won't contaminate other inmates, but sometimes the way they are isolated amounts to de facto solitary confinement. Also, contact with the outside world have been severely restricted, sometimes with adjustment, for example, the use of new technologies, but it still creates challenges and it cannot always replace meaningful human contact. And for this reason, and also one parenthesis for you to know also, last year, ODIHR and the APT, the Association for the Prevention of Torture, developed a guidance on monitoring places of detention through the COVID-19 pandemic. So actually it's a guide that is not really meant for trainers, but more for external monitors, but can also be useful. And it highlights like specific challenges caused by the pandemic in place of detention, and also a few good practices from OSCE participating states. And also for this reason, we wanted actually to integrate COVID-related concern into the training curriculum. So I really hope that all these references will become obsolete very soon and won't need to be used. But for now, we thought like as long as it lasts, it's interesting, I think, for trainers whenever they deliver the training also to discuss the specific challenges caused by COVID-19 in prison. So basically we include a discussion at the beginning, mainly for participants to share their experience related to COVID-19, how it affected their work. But also we decide to integrate it in more or less each sessions, let's say whenever it's relevant. To give you a few examples, for example, in the first module, we have a brainstorming exercise on COVID and vulnerability in prison. For example, focusing on older people, people with specific health conditions, also person with mental health issues that can be affected by the lack of contact with outside world, for example, people also with child caring responsibilities who need to maintain contact with their children or foreign nationals. And the second module, we have something about quarantine and isolation in the context of COVID-19. Also condition of detention and COVID, and how, for example, overcrowding, the lack of ventilation can worsen the situation. In the first module, we have a discussion on the impact of COVID on access to information and also contact with the outside world. And the 8th module, how COVID can impact rehabilitation of prisoners. For example, if there are no longer like education or different kind of activities or group activities for prisoners. So of course it will depend on the context, but mainly we thought it would be also important to integrate in the training. So I will stop now. Yeah, that's it. And give the floor to Martin Gilla, who's the head of the Office of International Affairs at the Swedish Prison and Probation Service, and will give you his perspective on the Mandela Rules and their use in practice.
So thank you so much, Laura, for highlighting some of the things in regards to the training curriculum. And thank you so much for the words also before, Andrea. Dear participants, as Laura mentioned, my name is Martin Gilla. I'm the head of Office for International Affairs in the Swedish Prison and Probation Service. It's a really pleasure and also an honor to participate in this event and hopefully shed some light on our perspective on the Nelson Mandela Rules and also on the training curriculum developed together with ODIHR and PRI and with the support also of UNODC. Sweden have a long tradition of multilateral collaboration with various international organizations and with a strong focus on safeguarding and strengthening human rights within the area of rule of law. As an executive national government agency and also mandated to execute the use of force towards individuals, I think it's of the utmost importance to address and act in accordance with and in the spirit of basic human rights and international standards, where the Nelson Mandela Rules constitutes the foundation in penitentiary settings. There is a certain responsibility to that when you are mandated by your national government to use force, and something you never can take lightly. Therefore, there is always a need for training in regard to human rights standards and practices. We are very proud to be a partner in this development of this training. And as mentioned before, the next step is in the development of the NMR manual is to arrange and conduct a pilot training. The Swedish Prison and Probation Service has been supporting and advising in the development, and we are now aiming for also trying to organize the pilot training in Sweden. The COVID-19 pandemic is still affecting our possibilities, however, to host international guests and gather larger groups as of now. However, we'll try to arrange for a mixed group of Swedish prison officers to attend, where some of them have worked internationally before and others work in various capacities in our national service. From this, we can hopefully adapt and update the curriculum together with ODIHR and PRI after that pilot training. Can also mention that in challenging times, it is even more important to elevate the significance of the NMRs and the human rights approach to prison operations. The COVID-19 pandemic have certainly thrust us all into a challenge we in many ways were not prepared to. Not only has it affected whole societies globally, but also in the ways we operate and behave as human beings. Social distancing and the restrictions has put a gap between people, and with that a certain amount of apathy in regard to interpersonal relations. To its worst extent, this could lead to the dehumanization of our inmates, which are in our duty of care. And this is not only true in regard to social distancing and the pandemic, but can also be triggered by stress among staff, overcrowding, and other challenging and operational environments. And this needs to be considered when working with human rights. The Nelson Mandela Rules, often referred to as the primary source of standards and a source to rely on in times of development and change. The Swedish Prison and Probation Service is in a phase of expansion and faces challenges with overcrowding and a growing number of high-risk inmates. New prison facilities and higher number of clients in custody and on probation requires large-scale recruitment of new prison and probation officers that needs training to ensure that we continue to deliver safe, secure, and humane correction services. All this needs to be in consideration to the human rights and the Nelson Mandela Rules and the European prison rules. They are firmly integrated in most aspects of the basic corrections training delivered to newly recruited officers. The Nelson Mandela Rules is also a cornerstone in our engagements abroad and in our international trainings. Sweden has since 2005 had the main responsibility globally for delivering correction-specific pre-deployment training for corrections officers deployed in United Nations peace operations, seconded by their national authorities as government-provided personnel. This pre-deployment training is also given to correction officers deploying to European Union civilian crisis management missions. The Swedish Prison and Probation Service has also deployed corrections experts to various peace operations and civilian crisis management missions for over 15 years. In these operations, normally in conflict and post-conflict settings in fragile states, we deliver a human rights-based approach to prison operation and management, where the recipient partner have a low institutional capacity and are normally underfunded and with a very weak infrastructure. This aggravates the challenges faced in these penitentiary systems in regards to living conditions, access to adequate healthcare, malnutrition, low staff ratio, and also normally severe overcrowding. We have a broad experience of delivering trainings and mentoring in various settings and contexts with the NMR as guiding principles. And we are also happy to see how these experiences connected to what are now included as modules in the training manual now developed together with ODIHR. Just to give some examples of international engagements during the years, we have had trainings within the framework of and in collaboration with UNODC in Kenya on prison management, classification, and risk and need assessments, which is covered in the third module of this training, and which details the importance of prisoner classification and individualized risk and needs assessment. We have also worked very many years in Liberia in the peace operation there, which was closed down a couple of years ago, UNMIL, where we delivered the smart security training for the Bureau for Corrections and Rehabilitation in Liberia. This is covered in the fifth module in this training that covers the areas such as incident prevention and response methods to maintain safety and security in prisons and deal with disciplinary offenses and manage unrest in a fair and humane way. We have also worked, for example, in Somalia with a program on rehabilitation and reintegration of high-risk inmates that are connected to Al-Shabaab. And some of these can also be connected into the 8th module of this training, where we review in the way in which prison staff can support the rehabilitation and reintegration of people in prison and how they can protect society against crime and also reduce recidivism, the primary purpose of a sound sanction system. And also to mention, of course, that the COVID-19 pandemic has halted most of the delivery of the international trainings we have, and as well as its national trainings. But it has also provided time for development of material and new ways to organize and deliver trainings. Parallel to this cooperation in developing the training manual on the NMR together with ODIHR, the Swedish Prison and Probation Service is supporting the United Nations Department of Peace Operations in the process of updating the manual for the pre-deployment training for officers deploying to peace operations, where the Nelson Mandela Rules is a cornerstone. The Swedish Prison and Probation Service has also a long-standing partnership with Penal Reform International, among others, and also an interest in broadening the cooperation with OSCE and ODIHR and engage in mutual capacity building of corrections in the areas where OSCE are present. Development of an NMR training is one step in this direction, and we strongly believe in human rights as the central pillar around which all other areas in the field of corrections revolves. And for us, it's a great honor to be able to contribute to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. I think we still have 10 minutes. So, yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, I think that we have a question in the chat. I can pick it up and see if either Laura or myself can answer that. I think it's was from my former colleague Gustav Talving. He's the executive director from Europris. He's a national Sweden, has been working in the Swedish Prison and Probation Service for many years. I think that he's either Gustav, if you want to take the floor and ask the questions, or if I should read it.
Or do you want to read it, or I can read it, of course, no problem.
I can take the floor. Thank you. I didn't know if we had time before. I need to leave soon for another meeting, but thank you so much for these interesting presentations. I think it's a very important step to sort of go from policy to practice. It's also a shared interest with Europris, of course, and the members of Europris. So my question is basically, what were your primary target groups when you designed this training? Because it's quite comprehensive, and maybe you would like to sort of pick and choose modules on your own, and if that is possible. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions?
Yes, I have a question, and my bad microphone. Sorry. Perhaps you could give some remarks on. I know the Mandela Rules, obviously, but could you say something about the applicability, the direct applicability of the rules in different states, different countries? Could you say something about the direct applicability of the rules in several countries? Thank you.
Maybe we can set the question one more time, okay?
I was interested, could you say something about in how far the Mandela Rules apply directly in different member states?
I don't see other questions. I think we can. I think we can also answer this too. So I actually, to answer this question, I mean, the Nelson Mandela Rules are like international standards. It's what we call soft law, right? So it's not a treaty or convention, but I think it really reflects customary law when it comes to the treatment of prisoner. And I think the process, also Andrea like talk about the adoption and the revision process involving really practitioners for different background. And I think there's an agreement that actually, I mean, it reflects the minimum standards. So of course now regarding applicability, I think, I mean, Martin probably knows like better than me when it comes to specific states and the laws and regulations applying to prisons. And I imagine some of them already integrate the rules, but I think it's also, they provide guidance to interpret any rule related to international standards and human rights, and notably the prevention of torture and ill treatment. And I think that's why also it's important to provide training, because it's, I mean, the rules are very also comprehensive, but it can also help ensuring that international standards are properly integrated in a practical way in prisons. Martin, do you want to add something?
I can come in and add a little bit from my perspective, and it's more out of experience rather than being coming when this was initially started up with development. But as I see it, and as I mentioned as well, I think that the target group, the target audience for such a training would be basic prison, national prison staff. I mean, it would be preferable if it was through the national training, of course, because there is a development of a training of a trainers. So you can see that it could be, you can do it self-sufficiently in the end. So that's one way to see it. I think that the other question in the applicability, I think it comes down very much in my experience working internationally for a couple of years, is that it's very much down to you need to do a needs assessment. I think that this is a very good basic training where you can take the next steps and see how do we want to develop, how will we, what gaps do we have in accordance to what the Nelson Mandela rule says? And as Laura mentioned, it's a soft law. I mean, there is no binding in it, but everybody wants to at least strive to uphold the basic rules in the NMRs. So I think that you need to do that need assessment. But then again, in a penitentiary system, which is a lot of areas that needs to be covered, I think that you should need to have the training in conjunction with also together with the target group could be decision makers to really see where are the most pressing needs for our national service, and then go from there and maybe delve into some other specific part after that as well. So I think that there is a good, this is a basic training. We should remember that to really give a more in-depth view on how to use the Mandela rules in a more applicable manner.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions?
Thanks a lot for the presentation. Will the guide and the training materials be translated into other languages?
This is, of course, I think I can't tell you exactly which languages, because it's, of course, it depends on the budget, but I think, yes, I think what we plan, because it's something usually we try to do within ODIHR, is always to have documents translated at least into Russian, but I think it's ideally, I mean, as long as there's budget and specific interest for some countries to use the material, it's possible. It's just like now, right now in our plan, we don't have the budget to translate it in many languages, but I hope that that it can be done at least on an individual basis if some countries really plan to use the curriculum.
Is there any other questions, maybe in the chat? Maybe somebody online want to ask a question? So thank you very much for the presentation. We will start the closing ceremony now. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
So, because two of us, you have to leave now, yeah? So my proposal is, before we leave, maybe we could make together photo, maybe next to the flags. Could we make photo with also participants from online? It's possible to open a screen with them or no? Yeah,
Yes,
maybe.
it's possible.
Yeah. So maybe we could stay next to the Polish flag on the right and left. On the center, we will have everyone from which are online with us, and we make the hybrid photo. Yeah. Yes, please. So please now, Dominika, maybe from the middle of the south.
Come please to me. I'll help you all. Honored participant, could you please turn on the cameras? Don't be shy.
Thank you very much.
A gdzieś ci Państwo są?
Tutaj, tu.
Dobra.
You're going right now. Yeah, so Director Commandant has a few words to you. Yeah, thank you very much. Just go to Director Commandant and say a few words, okay? Thank you very much for that. And just go to the Director Commandant. He will tell you a few words.
At the beginning of our closing ceremony, our Rector Commandant General Marcin Strzelec from Academy of Justice would like to say a few important words and information for you two. So I give the voice to our Rector Commandant.
Dziękuję bardzo. Dziękuję za to wprowadzenie. Taką mam nadzieję, że to będą ważne słowa, ważne także dla współpracy, dla tych działań, które możemy, Szanowni Państwo, podejmować. Bardzo się cieszę, że ta konferencja EPTY mogła się odbyć w Polsce, że mogliście Państwo zapoznać się z funkcjonowaniem systemu kształcenia kadr penitencjarnych w naszym kraju. Cieszę się, że widzieliście zarówno tą naszą działalność w Warszawie, jak i działalność w Kaliszu. Jesteśmy, tak jak widzicie, po dużej zmianie organizacyjnej i istotne było to, żeby tą zmianę zaprezentować. Cieszę się, że było to możliwe. Tak jak widzicie Państwo, mamy teraz w Polsce duże możliwości działania i aktywności. Takie zadania stawia przed nami i potrzeba zmieniającego się świata, patrz przygotowania do jak najlepszego wykonywania obowiązków przez służby wymiaru sprawiedliwości, przez służby penitencjarne. Takie zadania stawiają nam też przełożeni i bardzo się cieszę, że mogliśmy się spotkać i podyskutować o różnych aspektach współpracy. Ja jestem zwolennikiem współpracy praktycznej, konkretnej, takiej nastawionej na bardzo realne działania, czy w obszarze dydaktycznym, czy w obszarze spotkań i wymiany doświadczeń, który też z dydaktyką mocno się wiąże, czy wreszcie w obszarze naukowym. Chciałbym, żebyście Państwo wiedzieli, że wszelkie inicjatywy związane chociażby z wymianą studentów, słuchaczy między Polską a Państwa krajami, wszystkie te propozycje bardzo pozytywnie rozpatrzymy. Jestem otwarty na tego typu wymianę. Mamy możliwości goszczenia Państwa wykładowców, Państwa i Państwa wykładowców, studentów, wszystkich Was w naszych obiektach w Kaliszu, czy tutaj w Warszawie. Dla grup naszych więzienników, oficerów służby więziennej, każda wymiana z państwami europejskimi, z członkami EPTA jest istotna. Jest istotna i podnosi tutaj wiedzę, podnosi kompetencje, daje też możliwości szerszego spojrzenia. Dlatego ja uznaję to jako bardzo istotny element kształcenia tego typu wymiany i dlatego bardzo chętnie będę wyrażał zgodę na goszczenie tutaj przedstawicieli różnych państw u nas. Jesteśmy otwarci na różnorodne propozycje, także udziału w wydarzeniach w Państwa krajach. Mając tą infrastrukturę, jesteśmy w stanie zaproponować Państwu udział bardzo często nieodpłatny tutaj naszych jednostkach, czyli kwestie czy zakwaterowania, czy wyżywienia, one nie stanowią dla nas problemu i to pewnie w wielu przypadkach zdecydowanie też daje szersze możliwości współpracy. Ja liczę też na współpracę w obszarze badawczym, o czym wspominaliśmy wcześniej. Pierwszego dnia dużo na ten temat rozmawialiśmy, także też jak najbardziej jesteśmy otwarci na te działania. Dziękuję wszystkim przedstawicielom naszej uczelni za udział, w szczególności przedstawicielom Instytutu Badawczo-Rozwojowego i liczę, że te kontakty i bezpośrednie, i instytucjonalne uda się nawiązywać i w różnych projektach badawczych czy edukacyjnych będziemy wspólnie współpracowali. Dziękuję serdecznie, bardzo się cieszę z tego, że mogliście Państwo być z nami tutaj osobiście. Ta część osób, które miałem przyjemność i mieliśmy przyjemność poznać. Żałuję, że nie wszyscy mogliśmy się spotkać. Pozdrawiam serdecznie raz jeszcze wszystkich uczestników zdalnie uczestniczących w tej konferencji. Zapraszam serdecznie do Polski, także do współpracy na różnych polach dydaktycznych czy naukowych. Mam nadzieję, że te relacje będą się zacieśniały i będziemy z pożytkiem dla naszych organizacji, dla naszych służb więziennych i penitencjarnych mogli rozwijać różne te obszary działalności. Dziękuję bardzo.
The next part of our closing ceremony is the next EPTA presidency. Based on the acclamation, the Center of Legal Studies and Specialist Training in Catalonia was chosen to the next EPTA presidency 2022. Rector Commandant, could you please continue?
Tak, bardzo się cieszę i gratuluję Katalonii przejęcia prezydencji. Niniejszym to prezydencję przekazuję na ręce pani Laury Martinez-Portier, Director of the Center of Legal Studies and Specialized Training in Catalonia. Gratuluję Katalonii, gratuluję pani dyrektor. Mam nadzieję, że ten kolejny rok prezydencji będzie kolejnym rokiem, w którym będziemy rozwijali naszą współpracę. Jestem o tym przekonany. Miałem przyjemność uczestniczyć już w jednym spotkaniu w Katalonii i w konferencji EPTY. Także wiem i jestem przekonany o tym, że trafia ta prezydencja w dobre ręce.
Thank you very much. I think that's the time for the speakers from Catalonia for the new presidency will take your time.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the 14th General Assembly of EPTA, the Academy of Justice of Poland, Eurobreeze, the Netherlands Helsinki Committee, EPTA itself, and the European Union for giving the opportunity to the Center of Legal Studies and Specialized Training of the Justice Department of Catalonia to present its candidature for hosting the presidency the next year. It's really an honor for the center and for the whole Justice Department of Catalonia. I'm happy to share with you all the personal greetings of the Minister of Justice of the Government of Catalonia and her complete commitment and compromise with our candidature. The Justice Department throughout the center has been involved in EPTA from the very beginning. In this sense, the center was one of the founder members at the meeting organized by INAP in 2008. Since that moment, the center has been completely engaged with the activities of EPTA, attending and contributing with presentations at the yearly General Assemblies, taking part in common projects, answering questions or on training topics, and very in particular, hosting the 7th General Assembly on 2014 in Barcelona. This deep involvement is a consequence of our clear aim to be present in the international arena, just collaborating with all the other relevant training academies around Europe in order to learn from each other and to improve and enhance the role of training of correctional staff as one of the key components of the European prison services. We are really very enthusiastic about the challenge to host the presidency during the next year, hoping that this will be the time for meeting all together in person in Barcelona. Before giving the floor to my colleague Mar Ceron to let him explain briefly the main activities that we carry out of the center, let me give huge thanks to our colleagues of the Polish Academy of Justice for making possible the General Assembly this year. I wish to see you all in Barcelona next year. Thanks a lot, and Mark, please, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Director. Many thanks, Laura. Good afternoon again. As the Director pointed, I would like to update you briefly about the duties and activities that the Center carry out. The Center for Legal Studies and Specialized Training is an autonomous administrative body attached to the Department of Justice. The fundamental mission of the center consists, therefore, of planning and organizing training to all staff attached to the Department of Justice in order to enhance their personal and professional growing. It is crucial for us to adopt this holistic view of our clients. Do we understand that it's not about only to transmit knowledge and skills? Our task is as well to put the personal need in the middle of our current activities. Albeit the pandemic, in 2020, we had more than 20,000 attendants to our activities, and we reached, as I explained it before, an average of 3.6 points over 4 in the scale of satisfaction per activity. It was translated into more than 20,000 hours per year. The center is composed of 4 areas. One is devoted to the internal affairs related to human resources and economical duties, and 3 others are dedicated to particular target groups. As well, the center hosts the Observatory for Gender Violence, Faith, Injustice in Catalonia. Looking into the 3 areas I mentioned previously, the area of investigation and training of correctional measures is responsible for this specific field of training and research. One of these areas' principal duties is to provide initial and ongoing training for the staff at the Prison Service and Probation Service, those involved in juvenile justice, and finally, the members of the teams that attend victims and deliver restorative justice programs. This area covers matters such as the legislative framework, instrumental techniques for intervention in the fields of education and rehabilitation, risk assessment, security, among many other issues. Another area deals with the training for the judicial system. The center, in this sense, offers training to the following professional groups: judges, public prosecutors, clerks of court, forensic surgeons, and court staff. The training offered is structured as follows: a training program for judges, public prosecutors, and forensic surgeons, a training program for other staff working in courts, and a program to prepare selective exams to become judge or public prosecutor. We have as well a general training area for staff working at the headquarters of the Department of Justice. This area provides training for directors and managers in the department, for civil servants working in central services, and for administrative and technical staff on basically 3 topics: training for managers and executives, Catalan language training, general training that includes training on new technologies, occupational health and safety training. We deliver as well, and we work as well on the field of research, applied research. The center, in this sense, promotes research in the fields of the application of criminal sanctions and measures, penal mediation, and victim support. Researchers are focused on improving the work carried out by the staff working in prisons, juvenile justice, or community sanctions. If you visit the website of the center, you may download the document related with such researchers. The center offers to students of Catalan universities as well different practicum programs in our facilities. These practices are carried out in court offices, prisons, juvenile offenders institutions, etc. The center allocates a specialized public library with publications, journals, and audiovisual material on criminal law, prison law, youth justice, administrative laws, civil law, family law, and other topics such as psychology, pedagogy, social work, drug dependency, immigration, human resources, and training management. Finally, we organize together with the Criminal Justice Platform. As you know, Europees is one of the partners of this joint venture, the yearly edition of the summer course, usually in July, and we used to host international conferences or seminars in the field of justice with different relevant stakeholders. From a very practical point of view, we are placed in the middle of the city of Barcelona and very well connected with all the city public transport facilities. So we truly think that as part of the Justice Department, we are in conditions as well to run study visits to prison facilities and charities in the community that work with that and for prisoners. Thanks for your attention, and we are looking forward to see next year in Barcelona.
So thank you very much for this conference, for your present here. So it's time to close our conference. Thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you.